The neighborhood patrol burned down my house for not joining, but then they find out I'm a federal judge. I stood there, watching in horror as my cherished Victorian home was reduced to ashes. Meanwhile, my neighbor from the neighborhood patrol, Karen, sipped her coffee with a smug grin, convinced she had finally won our long-standing feud. What she didn't realize was that I'm a federal judge with the authority to dismantle everything she had built. But how far would she push me before I revealed my true identity? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The day had started like any other. I was on my grandmother's century-old porch swing, enjoying a cup of coffee as the sunrise bathed the sky in soft shades of pink, contrasting with the deep purple accents of my Victorian house. That's when I noticed her. Karen Thompson Power was making her way toward my mailbox, clutching an envelope as if it contained a winning lottery ticket. I had seen that determined expression before, during the local meetings she hosted at her freshly renovated mansion next door. A familiar sense of unease settled in my stomach as she slipped the envelope inside my mailbox. But she didn't leave right away. Instead, she took out her phone and started snapping pictures of my yard. My grandmother's roses were in full bloom, their natural beauty standing in stark contrast to Karen's meticulously trimmed hedges. I knew she despised anything that didn't look uniform. The envelope contained what she described as an exciting opportunity, a formal invitation to join the newly established neighborhood patrol, complete with a glossy brochure displaying rows of identical beige houses with matching fences and mailboxes. The entry fee, $5,000, followed by a $350 monthly payment. But that wasn't the part that made my hands tremble. It was the list of mandatory property alterations attached. Repaint the house to match the approved color palette, meaning my grandmother's beloved purple trim had to go. Remove the heritage rose garden and replace it with pre-approved landscaping. Take down the antique wind chimes, which had sung me to sleep since I was a child. From my window, I watched Karen stride back home, phone pressed against her ear. "Yes, I just dropped off the final invitation," she said, her syrupy sweet tone making my skin crawl. She won't have a choice now. Her house is the last one holding out. Then she chuckled. Once we get her property in line, the value of this neighborhood is going to skyrocket. That evening, I walked to Karen's house with the invitation in hand. Her doorbell played an instrumental version of "We Are the Champions." Of course it did. She greeted me wearing a community safety captain badge on her blouse, stretching her lips into a forced smile. "I reviewed your proposal," I said, keeping my tone professional, my years of legal experience keeping me composed. "I'm going to have to decline. This home has been in my family for 3 generations, and I intend to preserve its historical significance." Her expression shifted instantly, as if I had just insulted her entire existence. "You don't understand," she said, leaning forward. "This isn't really an invitation. The neighborhood patrol is already registered. Your property is surrounded by members. You have to comply." I pulled out the property records I had spent the afternoon researching. "Actually, that's incorrect. My deed predates any neighborhood patrol regulations, and I am under no legal obligation to participate. 20 years in the legal field had taught me to always be prepared." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Listen here," she snapped, her sugary facade disappearing. "This community is evolving. Progress is happening. If you don't go along with it, things might get difficult." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Accidents happen to houses that don't meet code. Complaints pile up. Fines get issued." I held her gaze. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Thompson?" She took a step back, her fake smile returning. "Of course not. I'm simply concerned about the safety and market value of your home. Old houses can be so unpredictable. Electrical fires, structural failures. It would be such a shame if something happened just because you refuse to modernize." Behind her, I caught sight of her husband peering through their window, phone in hand. Something about his stance made me uneasy. I turned to leave, but Karen's voice stopped me. "1 week," she called out. "You have 1 week to reconsider before the Neighborhood Patrol Board meets to discuss enforcement options." As I walked back home, I noticed more neighbors watching from behind their curtains. Karen's allies, no doubt. I had the sinking feeling that this wasn't going to end with a simple no. That night, I installed security cameras around my property and meticulously documented every inch of my home. My instincts had never failed me before, and right now, they were screaming that Karen Thompson was just getting started. But what I didn't realize was that this wasn't just about property values or house colors. In my 3 decades of dealing with difficult people, I had never met someone quite like Karen. And as I fell asleep to the soft chime of my grandmother's wind bells, I had no idea that this was only the beginning of a war that would change everything, and that my beloved Victorian home would be its first casualty. But Karen had made one fatal mistake when she chose her target. She just didn't know it yet. The morning kicked off with Karen's high-pitched voice ringing outside my window. Just look at those dreadful purple accents. They're dragging down our property values. I pulled back my curtain slightly and saw her at the head of a small group of neighborhood patrol members, leading what they proudly called their morning inspection. My stomach dropped as I watched them meticulously snap photos of every inch of my grandmother's beloved house. I tried to focus on my morning coffee out on the porch, but their whispers carried across the lawn, loud enough for me to hear. Did you notice those old wind chimes? They're not on the approved list. And those roses, they're 3 inches taller than the allowed height. Every single day, a new complaint popped up, each more ridiculous than the last. Soon, they started plastering bright orange violation notices on my front door, citing infractions that hadn't even existed before they formed this patrol. Suddenly, the historic rose garden my grandmother had lovingly planted was considered a nuisance to the neighborhood. The authentic Victorian purple trim, once admired by tourists who stopped to take pictures, had become their biggest obsession. One Tuesday morning, I spotted Karen measuring my lawn with a ruler. 11.5 inches. She announced triumphantly to her sidekick, Barbara, who was furiously scribbling notes in a small notebook. That's 3.5 inches over the limit. I walked out calmly, coffee in hand. You're trespassing on private property, I stated firmly, fully aware of my legal rights, but choosing to keep my profession to myself. Karen just smirked, snapped another picture, and acted like she owned the place. The harassment escalated in creative ways. They started sending landscapers to show up at exactly 7 a.m. every Saturday, their obnoxiously loud equipment conveniently placed near my bedroom window. Anonymous complaints to the city's code enforcement office became a weekly routine. Each time, I calmly presented the historical status documentation of my property. And each time, I watched Karen fume from behind her curtains. So they switched tactics. Psychological warfare. Next, Karen hosted her neighborhood patrol meetings in her driveway, directly outside my home office. I could hear them talking about how certain people were bringing down the neighborhood's reputation and how some houses needed to be dealt with for the greater good. My security cameras caught them pushing boundaries. They started letting their dogs use my yard as their personal bathroom, then acted shocked when I confronted them with the footage. Oh, my precious Bentley would never. Karen gasped dramatically, clutching her pearls as her enormous golden doodle left yet another gift on my lawn. The breaking point came during the annual neighborhood block party. Of course, I wasn't invited, but I could still hear Karen loudly discussing her plans to improve the community. Some of these older properties, she announced, glancing directly at my home, just don't fit our vision for the neighborhood anymore. That's when I noticed people taking pictures of my home's foundation, whispering about structural concerns. I stayed calm, documenting everything. Every letter, every photo, every anonymous complaint. I filed them meticulously. When they installed bright security lights aimed straight at my bedroom windows, I added light pollution to my ever-growing evidence folder. My grandmother had taught me patience, and as I watched Karen's group grow bolder, I knew timing would be everything. That night, reviewing my security footage, I caught something disturbing. 2 neighborhood patrol board members were examining my property line markers, whispering about easement laws. I recognized that look. They were planning something bigger. But what they didn't know was that I had spent my career dealing with people who thought they were untouchable. That night, as I switched off my porch light, I watched Karen and her group huddle in her driveway, scheming. How long should I wait before showing them exactly who they were dealing with? I never expected to catch Karen and 2 board members sneaking around my property at midnight. But there they were, illuminated by my kitchen light as I got up for a glass of water. My heart stopped when I saw the chemical sprayers in their hands, aimed directly at my grandmother's century-old rose garden. What do you think you're doing? I called out from my porch, already recording on my phone. Karen jumped, but quickly composed herself, that toxic smile spreading across her face like poison. Oh, we're just helping to remove invasive species, she cooed sweetly, still spraying my roses. The neighborhood patrol has strict regulations about non-native plants. Her tone was calculated. If you just join us, we could handle these issues properly. I stepped forward, blood boiling, but my voice steady. These aren't invasive species, Karen. They're heritage Victorian roses, planted by my grandmother in 1960. I have the original documentation and their Botanical Society registration. The two board members beside her shifted uncomfortably, but Karen stood her ground. Well, someone complained about the smell. She sniffed, dramatically adjusting her designer pajamas. And these thorns are a safety hazard for children walking by. On my private property, behind my fence? I challenged, flipping on my security floodlights. The property line is clearly marked, and you're trespassing. That's when Bob, Karen's husband, stepped out of the shadows. As a retired police sergeant, he thought he could intimidate anyone. Now, let's not throw around accusations, he said smoothly, his tone practiced. We're just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. No one wants to live next to a jungle. From across the street, I noticed Mrs. Watson, my elderly neighbor, peeking through her curtains. Last month, they had bullied her into joining the neighborhood patrol after similar late-night visits. Her beautiful rock garden had been ripped out within days and replaced with Karen-approved generic shrubs. The next morning, my roses were dead. The once vibrant petals had turned black and withered. But Karen had made a fatal mistake. Without realizing it, she had exposed the neighborhood patrol's pattern of targeting specific homeowners. During my lunch break, I went to the county records office and discovered that every home that initially refused to join the neighborhood patrol had mysteriously suffered accidents or code violations until they sold. That afternoon, I installed high-definition security cameras, carefully hiding them among the remaining plants. That evening, Karen paraded potential buyers past my property. Of course, this eyesore will be taken care of soon, Karen declared loudly. We have ways of handling difficult homeowners. The following week, the harassment intensified. My mailbox was knocked over 3 times. Anonymous complaints were filed about noise violations on days I wasn't even home. City inspectors showed up daily, finding nothing but returning anyway. My trash bins vanished, only to be miraculously found in violation of neighborhood patrol regulations. I documented everything meticulously, quietly building my case. But Karen's group grew more aggressive. They began hosting their patrol meetings right in front of my house, pointing out every supposed flaw to new potential homebuyers. This property is driving down the entire neighborhood's value, Karen would declare, dramatically waving her designer handbag. But don't worry, she would flash a satisfied smile. It won't be a problem much longer. The final straw came when I caught them tampering with my historic fence posts, carefully loosening them while pretending to measure the sidewalk. My security cameras captured Karen instructing her minions. Once these posts fail inspection, she'll have to replace the entire fence with our approved model. She smirked. That'll cost her thousands. Unless, of course, she joins the patrol. That night, while reviewing my security footage, I noticed something alarming. The neighborhood patrol's inspection team always included someone photographing my electrical boxes, gas lines, and other key utilities. They were methodically documenting every possible weakness of my home. But why? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the image they created sent chills down my spine. I knew I had to act fast, but I couldn't show my hand yet. What I didn't know was that Karen had already set a plan in motion, a plan that would turn my worst fears into reality. My hands trembled as I held the morning paper. The headline detailed the prison sentence I had just handed down to a corrupt corrections officer. The courtroom was dead silent when my assistant, Emily, burst through the doors, her face pale as a ghost. "Your Honor, your house, it's on fire." 5 words. They made my blood run cold. I ripped off my black robe and sprinted down the courthouse steps, my heart pounding in my chest. 15 minutes. That's all it took to drive home, but it felt like an eternity. When I turned the corner, I saw thick black smoke rising 3 blocks away. My stomach turned to ice. The beautiful purple trim my grandmother had lovingly painted was now being devoured by raging orange flames. I slammed my car to a stop in front of my burning home, where firefighters were already battling the inferno. The heat hit me like a brick wall, and the ancient wooden beams groaned under the relentless attack of the flames. Everything my family had built over 3 generations was disappearing before my eyes. Through my tears, I spotted Karen standing in her driveway, dressed in expensive yoga pants, sipping her overpriced coffee as if she were watching a morning talk show. Her perfectly styled blonde hair glistened in the sunlight as she casually chatted with other members of the neighborhood patrol. They weren't even trying to hide their satisfaction. They whispered, pointed, smirked, openly discussing different parts of my burning home. The fire chief, Martinez, approached me, his face Hands, I grabbed my phone and tried to access the footage. The screen was blank. The cameras had mysteriously stopped recording at 3 a.m., exactly 4 hours before the fire started. This wasn't a coincidence. As I stood there, watching my home burn, memories flooded my mind. Baking cookies with my grandmother in that kitchen. Celebrating my law school graduation in the backyard. My first day as a judge. All going up in smoke. And for what? Because I refused to bow down to Karen and her precious neighborhood patrol. Because I said no. Because they couldn't buy me. Through the crowd of onlookers, I spotted two familiar faces. Bob Johnson and Mike Peters. Neighborhood patrol board members. Trying to blend in with the crowd. But their shoes caught my eye. The same work boots I had seen in my security footage last week, when my rose bushes were destroyed. Now, they were covered in dark stains. Or was it ash? Karen strutted over, her face a mask of fake sympathy. "Oh, this is just awful," she sighed dramatically. She took another slow sip of her coffee. "If only you had joined the patrol." She smiled that sickly sweet, rehearsed smile. "We have such strict safety regulations. But you were so stubborn about keeping things historic." She said the word like it was dirty. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Not yet. I couldn't expose my plan yet. Instead, I watched as Karen pulled out her phone, quickly typing something. Moments later, I overheard a neighbor talking excitedly. "Looks like a prime piece of land just hit the market in an exclusive real estate group. The fire wasn't even out, and they were already selling my home." The firefighters finally got the flames under control, but it was too late. The gorgeous Victorian windows were shattered. The handcar porch railings were charred beyond recognition. The roof had partially collapsed. A century of history, destroyed in a matter of hours. I stood there, watching the smoke rise into the morning sky. At that moment, I made my decision. Karen thought she had won, that she had broken me. But she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. One to my contact at the FBI, another to a state prosecutor I trusted, and the last to a private investigator who never missed a detail. As I dialed, I saw Karen watching me, a flicker of doubt crossing her face for just a moment. She didn't know who I was calling, but something about my unwavering stance must have unsettled her. Good, let her worry, because while my house lay in ruins, my real power had never been about property. It was about justice. As the sun rose higher in the sky, I bent down and picked up a small, charred piece of the purple trim. My grandmother had always told me that sometimes you have to lose everything to find the strength to fight back. Looking at Karen's smug expression one last time, I knew exactly what I had to do next. But first, I needed to understand just how deep this neighborhood council corruption went. Standing in the ashes of my grandmother's home, I made a promise that turned my grief into purpose. While Karen paraded around the neighborhood, whispering lies that I had burned my own house down for insurance money, I was quietly pulling threads that would unravel her entire operation. My first real breakthrough came thanks to an old law school friend, now a real estate investigator. He had found something strange. Every house that had mysteriously burned down in our county over the last 5 years had been sold to the same shell company. The owner? Karen's sister-in-law. My hands shook as I combed through property records, each page revealing a pattern too perfect to be coincidence. I hired a private investigator to interview former homeowners who had lost their properties. Their stories match mine exactly. Join the neighborhood council, or face endless harassment, then escalating vandalism, followed by mysterious accidents or fires. Most had given up, selling their homes for pennies on the dollar to Karen's investment group. One elderly man broke down crying, describing how he lost all his family photos in a suspicious garage fire, just one day after refusing to join. The real turning point came from an unexpected source. Karen's former council treasurer reached out to my lawyer. We met at a quiet diner 2 towns over. She slid a USB drive across the table with trembling fingers. 5 years of financial records from the neighborhood council. She explained how Karen had forced her to cook the books, threatening to report her immigration status if she refused. The documents showed hundreds of thousands in cash deposits, all made after each accidental fire. But there was still a missing piece. Karen wasn't just profiting off these fires. She had inside protection. Her husband hadn't just retired from the police force. He was the fire investigator for the county. Every suspicious fire in their jurisdiction had been quickly ruled an accident. No further investigation. No follow-ups. Insurance companies had paid out millions based on his reports. My security cameras had captured more than just the arsonists. They had recorded weekly meetings at Karen's house with real estate developers, all salivating over plans to build luxury condos where historic homes once stood. One of them even bragged about bribing city officials to change zoning laws as soon as they acquired enough properties. The scheme was clear. Karen targeted homes in prime locations, especially historic ones, because they couldn't be easily rebuilt. She used council regulations to fine and harass homeowners until they either gave up or pushed back. If they resisted, she escalated to vandalism and threats. If that didn't work, accidents started happening. And once the owner was pushed to the brink, Karen's investment group swooped in, offering a lifeline, buying the home for next to nothing. Working late one night, I found a final, undeniable proof in old county archives. Karen had done this before. 3 other historic neighborhoods in nearby counties had suffered the exact same fate. She would move in from a council, drive out resistant homeowners, and then sell the properties to developers for millions. She had even won community service awards for neighborhood improvement. The evidence was damning, but I needed more. I convinced the FBI to wire the former treasurer for a meeting with Karen. The recording captured everything. Karen bragging about their next targets. Karen joking about which houses might have electrical problems. Karen casually threatening to make the treasurer disappear if she ever talked. Each day, I watched Karen strut around the neighborhood, convinced she was untouchable, while I quietly built my case. She had no idea that every smug wave, every fake sympathetic comment about my tragedy was being documented. Her arrogance would be her downfall. The final piece fell into place when I discovered why she targeted my house specifically. Buried in city archives was an old zoning map showing plans for a major highway expansion. Karen's developer friends had inside information. My property was the key to their multi-million-dollar shopping complex. They had already bought up the surrounding land through shell companies, but without my house, their entire project would collapse. As I organized the evidence for the FBI, Karen's desperation grew. She filed daily complaints about my unsightly property, now just a burned-out shell. She even had the audacity to propose a special assessment to clean up my lot, money that would go straight into her pocket. Little did she know, every move she made only tightened the noose around her neck. That night, I stood outside the community center, my heart pounding as I watched Karen strut through the entrance, her signature coffee mug in hand, a stack of papers under her arm. Tonight's neighborhood council meeting would be different. After 6 months of careful planning, she was finally about to find out who she had been messing with. Through the window, I saw her setting up her PowerPoint presentation, probably filled with fake violation photos and fabricated rules. My fingers brushed over my judicial robes, neatly folded in my briefcase. The weight of the FBI wire under my blazer reminded me that everything had to go exactly as planned. The property at 247 Maple Street has been officially declared a public nuisance. Karen's voice rang out as I quietly pushed the door open. Under our emergency powers, we will be moving forward with immediate redevelopment plans. A murmur of confusion spread through the room. The decent neighbors, the ones who had been too scared to stand up to her, shifted uneasily in their seats. Any objections? Karen smirked, scanning the room. No? Well, then, let me show you our exciting plans for her. I object, Mrs. Thompson. My voice cut through the room like a knife. Every head turned toward the entrance. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Karen's smug grin flickered for a second, but she quickly recovered. Well, finally ready to admit defeat? Actually, I'm here to present some evidence of my own. I pulled out a thick folder and laid the first photograph on the table. This is footage of you and your council members on my property the night of the fire. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Karen's face twitched. Those could be anyone. And besides, you can't prove it. Oh, but I can. I pulled out more documents. Bank records showing suspicious payments to your shell company after every distressed property sale. Emails detailing your plans to drive out homeowners who refuse to join the neighborhood council. And my personal favorite, your own text messages about making sure the electrical fire looked accidental. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Karen's hands started shaking, coffee spilling over the rim of her mug. This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here throwing around these wild accusations. I'll sue you for defamation. That was my cue. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out my judge's robe. The silk fabric unfurled as I calmly slipped it on. Federal Judge Sarah Martinez, I announced, watching the color drain from Karen's face. currently presiding over case number 2025 CR 142, United States versus Thompson et al. A RICO investigation into corruption, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Her coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The hot liquid splashed across her designer shoes, but she didn't even notice. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. FBI. Nobody moved. Right on cue, agents burst through both doors, badges raised. Karen's husband, the retired police sergeant who had buried all those reports, tried to make a break for the emergency exit. He didn't make it 3 steps before being tackled to the ground. I walked up to Karen, who had collapsed into her precious council president's chair. You know what the biggest mistake criminals make? She looked up at me, panic in her eyes. They get so drunk on their own power that they forget to check who they're really dealing with. I picked up her gavel, the one she had used to declare homes a nuisance, and sentenced them to demolition. Meeting adjourned. The click of handcuffs echoed through the room as the FBI led Karen and her council members away. My neighbors erupted in cheers and applause. Years of fear and intimidation finally broken. As I packed up my files, Mrs. Johnson, my elderly neighbor, hugged me with tears in her eyes. "We should have helped you fight them," she whispered. I hugged her back, watching Karen being escorted into a waiting police car. Sometimes, justice takes the long road to make sure it arrives at the right destination. The morning of the trial, everything felt different. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, straightening my judge's robe, thinking about how Karen had laughed while my house burned. Now, she wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and victims from other neighborhoods who had come forward after seeing our story on the news. Karen walked in wearing an expensive suit instead of her usual yoga pants, but her face turned ghost white when she saw me sitting on the bench. I'll never forget how she grabbed her lawyer's arm and whispered, "That's her, the one whose house we burned." Her lawyer dropped his pen. The evidence we presented was overwhelming. Our investigation uncovered 15 other homes that had mysteriously caught fire after their owners refused to join Karen's neighborhood council. The pattern was always the same: harassment, vandalism, fire. The burned homes were bought for pennies on the dollar through a shell company owned by Karen's brother-in-law. They had already made millions. We played the security footage from my cameras. The entire courtroom held their breath, watching Karen and her council members pouring gasoline on my grandmother's rose bushes at 2 a.m. Karen kept shaking her head, whispering no, as her own voice played over the speakers. Once it burns, she'll have to sell. The real shock came when Karen's husband, the retired police sergeant, turned against her. He had stayed silent out of loyalty, but seeing the evidence broke him. He told everything: how they picked their targets, how they coordinated the attacks, how they bribed local officials to look the other way. Karen screamed "liar" so loudly that the bailiff had to remove her from the courtroom. One by one, victims stood up to tell their stories. Mrs. Rodriguez, the retired teacher who lost every photo of her family. The Patel family, whose grandfather's ashes were destroyed in the fire. Each testimony made Karen shrink deeper into her chair. Her expensive suit couldn't hide the fear on her face anymore. When I read the verdict, my voice was steady. 25 years for Karen. 15 years for each council member. Their faces finally showed they understood that no amount of money could save them from justice. Karen tried to give a speech about how she was just trying to protect property values. I cut her off the same way she had always cut me off whenever I tried to explain the history of my grandmother's home. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm watching construction workers put the finishing touches on my rebuilt Victorian home. The purple trim is exactly how Grandma painted it. The rose garden is coming back, with cuttings from the only surviving bush. Karen's house was sold to pay victim compensation. Now, a wonderful immigrant family lives there. Their kids play in the yard where Karen used to stand, taking photos of my supposed violations. The new neighbors created a real community association. Not a corrupt council, but a group that actually helps each other. We have block parties in my garden. Everyone brings food and shares stories. Yesterday, Mrs. Rodriguez brought her famous empanadas and showed me family photos that her daughter managed to restore from damaged albums. Sometimes, while working in my garden, people stop to thank me, not for being a judge, but for standing up to bullies. The local news did a follow-up story on how we transformed from the neighborhood Karen terrorized into a real community. They interviewed the Patel family, who now host our monthly meetings in their beautiful backyard. In my courthouse office, I keep the coffee mug Karen dropped when she realized who I was. It reminds me that justice may move slowly, but it always moves forward, just like my grandmother always said. And every morning, I sip my coffee in my rose garden, watching the sun rise through my perfectly purple-trimmed windows, knowing that sometimes the best revenge is rebuilding something even more beautiful than what was destroyed.